My name's Andrew Kelly from Bristol Ideas, and I'm hosting today's event. Thank you so much for coming out. This is our first return to sustained live performances, and we're all learning as we go along. I'm very grateful to Watershed for hosting us and for helping us with all the social distancing rules that we have to respect. So thank you very much for that. For us in Bristol Ideas, film and media have been one of the most important of the arts, as well as one of the most important economic forces in Bristol. And it's something we've supported right from the start, from when we first created the project at Bristol, just down the road from here, now We the Curious, when we set up with Mark Cosgrove at Watershed, the Encounters Film Festival, and the use of film and media in all our work, including our new Future Cities Film Festival. This year we're marking 100 years since the death of William Friese-Greene, who was born in Bristol, and we've launched a project called Bristol Film 2021. You should have been able to get a copy of the book we've produced, which is available outside if you haven't got that. Do take a copy of that. And we'll have more on that later on today. But what we're about today is what we can learn from this experience in Bristol and where the film, media, TV industry can go in the future. And we're delighted to have such an excellent range of speakers with us today, who I'll introduce as we go along. I particularly want to thank the National Lottery Heritage Fund for London and the South West, who have supported our Bristol Film 2021 project, as well as UNESCO City of Film and Visit Britain, who have also supported this event. And UNESCO City of Film have co-organised today. As part of this work, we commissioned a number of writers to write essays for the book, and some of them will read brief extracts from their essays during the morning. We also commissioned 3 short films, and we're going to show those throughout the morning as well. And I'd like to introduce now Rich Warren from Encounters, who will introduce the first of the films. Rich.
Morning, everyone. Just to echo what Andrew said about thanking National Lottery Heritage Fund. Thanks to them, we was able to commission 3 short filmmakers, a very early stage career filmmakers, to make films that were completely down to them and along the theme of Film 2021 and Bristol as a city of film and their interpretation of what that means. So I'd like to introduce the first one, which is called An Ode to My Commute by Anna Missouri.
Is Anna in the audience? Is she here? No? Okay, well, congratulations, Anna. Well done. Thank you for that. I'd like now to introduce Lynn Barlow, who's co-chair of the One City Culture Board and also at the University of the West of England, who's going to talk about the work that she's doing in film and media. Thank you, Anna. Lynn.
I'd quite like to be Anne, actually. That was a lovely film, wasn't it? Right. What do you reckon? Oh, I think that's really not the right place for it to go, is it? Good morning, everybody. As Andrew said, my name is Lynn Barlow, and I do several things, but my principal job is as Assistant Vice-Chancellor, Creative and Cultural Industries Engagement at UWE here in Bristol. But actually, Andrew invited me this morning in my capacity as co-chair of the nascent One City Culture Board. For those of you who haven't heard of Bristol's One City Boards or the One City Plan, it's a way of bringing ideas and expertise into the running of this city. It is soft power only and relies on the impact and influence we can have if we work together. I also contribute to the region's conversation about the importance of creativity and culture through the regional authority, the West of England Combined Authority, and we'll be publishing a cultural strategy for the region in December. So anyway, forgive that GCSE level lecture in politics to start, but it's good to understand how this stuff works if we really are to achieve a sustainable and inspiring future for the booming film and television sector in the City region. But first of all, I'd like you to take a quick look of some of the amazing work that's being done in the professional sector at the moment. This is the show reel from the recent Royal Television Society West of England Awards, which took place at the Old Vic a couple of weeks ago. So let's have a look. Right. Apparently I just do this. Said Ewan. Go.
To restore stability to our planet, we must restore its biodiversity.
There might not be, time.
Many people will feel that they have to concentrate more.
The industry is very nervous about this subject.
We're going to see an enormous diversity.
Look at that. Isn't that just spectacular?
I'm so excited.
Please, Lord, help me to make a difference to somebody today.
That's good.
I do think we need to do something about the music with those shows, don't you? It needs to be a bit more upbeat. But I mean, incredible content, and you'll already be able to recognise that there's a few BAFTA winners in there, and a few Grayson Award winners in there, and a few Network RTS awards as well. So what we actually produce in this part of the world goes through to punch through internationally as well. Anyway, we had more than 320 people in the audience that night. It really was a great evening, and I'm sure the Old Vic's bar take was pretty impressive. After all, it was the first time we'd been together in the same room for a while. Back to our local politics, just forgive me a moment. So, the bulk of government investment in the region comes through WECA. And we've just asked the government for a considerable increase in how much is invested in culture here. But let's see how we fare with that, because it really would be naive if we thought culture was top of the list of priorities after almost 2 years of pandemic. Although I'm sure everyone in this cinema knows how important culture is for our health and well-being. You know, what would we have done without the telly during lockdown? And I'm using telly here as a shorthand for moving image. Content we consume vicariously 24/7 on every size device. Now, my personal preference for a movie is in the shared experience of a big screen cinema like this, but I'm also a huge fan of the digital disruption created by Netflix. Apologies, Mark. Public money, taxpayers' cash, also flows through the BFI and Arts Council and through specific talent development organisations like Screen Skills and Creative England. OK, so why does this matter, you may think, when the vast majority of our incredible creative industries sit outside of that public purse? But it's that public money that is often used as the glue or the mortar to help construct something wonderful. So bear with me a minute when we look at the big picture with some figures on the current scale of our creative industries. The overall UK entertainment industry, which incorporates television, film, music and gaming, is worth over £68 billion in revenue. A 2021 report from PwC predicted that that would reach 88 billion by 2025, given the predicted growth in the sector. And not surprisingly, a very large part of that growth is from those streaming, there's a slip, isn't it? streaming services like Netflix and Amazon. Within the media industry, the UK is now Europe's largest video games market, and podcast listeners in the UK alone are set to grow 29% to reach 27 million by 2022. So those of you in the audience are thinking about a career in the media, I would really seriously think about podcasting. 27 million by 2022. That's just round the corner. The creative sector employs indirectly over 2 million people, with the majority outside of London. So who knew that? Domestically, television alone brought £16 billion, and that's excluding the licence fee, in 2018 into the UK economy. This includes advertising, subscriptions, some sponsorship and branded content, with the BBC licence fee adding another £3.75 billion on top. I know that's a lot of figures, but basically it's really important to be able to understand that we are in this golden age of content. And here in this wonderful creative city, we can rightly claim our place as a global leader. So we now have the building blocks for something very special. It's just that glue we need. You know, it was a huge relief when Channel 4 decided to open one of its London, out-of-London hubs in Bristol, not least because it took a while for the London-centric press to take our bid seriously. And that's always been one of our challenges. What's the Bristol story? What makes us distinct? Now, if you've got any answers, please, on a postcard to Mark here or to Andrew. It seems extraordinarily difficult for us to agree on who we are. We always knew we were a good brand match for Channel 4, young, vibrant, independent, with a long track record of being global leaders in programme making, from natural history and animation to documentaries. We'd recently been given the lifelong designation from UNESCO as a creative city of film. But you know, one of the most potent arguments for me was that we had had no public sector broadcasting, PSB, i.e. taxpayers' money, investment in this city for decades. And the other thing we also had was that argument. We also had an evidence base for the very first time about the size of the sector here. And you'll hear more about the current iteration of that piece of research from my colleagues from UE in a minute. But to be able to share and pitch with meaningful facts was really, really powerful. And I think one of the reasons that we actually did attract Channel 4 in the end. You know, we know that public investment in the creative sector is the glue that's needed to go forward. Just look at the huge public investment in Scotland and Wales, and then with our friends in the north and northwest to be accurate, where there was a huge media factory was built. And it's been a massive success in terms of economic growth and opportunity. And that's known as the cultural dividend. And that dividend does pay out handsomely when you can find the sweet spot between public and private sector agendas. And that's where my vision lies for the future of film and television in this city. As I've said, we have the building blocks in place to achieve great things: a booming sector, UNESCO status, a new national broadcaster in our midst, investment in our indies from some of the industry's biggest players, Sky, All3Media and Netflix, and of course our own studios at Bottle Yard in the south of the city. And that's where we've seen the first sizable investment in public money from WECA of almost £12 million. It is the beginnings of No, that's not what I've written here at all. Actually, what I've said, it's a real sign that our politicians are beginning to take us seriously. We've got sector-leading university courses, creative programmes in FE, and a healthy number of other talent development opportunities for our young people to find their place in what is the very best of careers. I didn't mention that I'm a documentary maker too, so I would say that, wouldn't I? But it's very true. Creative careers are fantastic. But to work out how to go forward, we actually do need to recognise what keeps us from standing still. Introspective thinking, fixed ideas, lack of generosity, and perhaps most importantly, from me, is a lack of trust, an unhealthy competition. Not the kind of competitive spirit which spurs you on to do your best work, be part of the best team, but the kind which makes some people and some organisations think that compromise is a weakness and not a strength. But you know, as every truly inspirational leader and successful business owner will tell you, is that they couldn't have done it alone, that they're only as good as the people around them. It may sound like a cliche, but cliches do tend to contain some truth. We need to act like a team in this city, embrace our differences and work together to find that sweet spot, where our growth supports the wider political and economic objectives for the region: inclusivity, sustainability, urban regeneration, and skills, and more skills. We need to plan properly for future growth, identify specific challenges. Do we need more post-production facilities? Do we need even more studio space? We need to encourage more young people to take a chance on production management and production accountancy to make our businesses really work. But you know, in reality, these aren't problems to be solved, but opportunities to flourish. With a shared belief that if we do work hand in hand, agree what makes us distinctive, be generous with our time and expertise, those building blocks can be glued together to create an even more vibrant and more successful film and television sector. And only by facilitating opportunities to find that sweet spot do we begin to maximise the potential of film and cinema in Bristol? And that's what we hope for the Culture Board, our UNESCO status, our flourishing independent production companies. It's all here, but if we want some of that public sector glue, we have to demonstrate that we're all in it together.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Well, that's a great story, Lynn. Thanks for telling us that, and we look forward to discussing that more with you. Lynn mentioned the research that's taking place at you. I'd like to introduce Steve Presence and Andrew Spicer to come and talk about that research now.
I'm a bit of a macophobe. Can we have... how do we open? Is it that'll be us then. That's not what I called it, but there we go. Kind of works like my PC. There we go. There we go. All right. Kick us off.
Okay, hello everyone, and thanks very much to Andrew for inviting us to this event. And thanks very much to Lynn for those kind words. I also want to thank the university, the West of England, because they funded this research, which is ongoing, as we'll see. So it's a double act, as you'll notice, and in time-honoured fashion, it's age before beauty, so it's me first. So this is a second edition, then, that we're moving towards at the moment, of a report that we made, well, the research was done in 2016. The report came out in 2017 on Bristol's film and television industries, which we called Go West. And we used the sort of West of England definition of the region that we're talking about, as you'll see there. So the first edition then, the research base then was 2 surveys of companies and freelancers working in that region. And we did approximately 20 qualitative interviews of about 45 minutes to an hour each. So that generated a quantitative data, number of employees, aggregate turnover, what they do, where they're based, and the number of companies. We also wanted to try to, thinking about what Lynn was saying, wanted to try to capture the way that Bristol had evolved as a sort of screen cluster or screen centre. So Go West contains a cultural history which discussed how that screen sector evolved and the challenges it faces. And as Lynn made abundantly clear, what's very interesting, I think, about Bristol is it has got this sort of evolutionary nature. It hasn't had major public investment, and it's grown incrementally in ways that we try to talk about in that history. And then we produced a map of the city's production centre, and that was the big selling point. After it came out, lots of people approached us and said, well, it's wonderful, that map. They actually never talked about the content, but they always talked about the map. So I think that maybe there's a way of marketing that separately. So I think I'm handing over to Steve now.
So for this second edition then, we're focusing on producing revised statistics on all the different companies in the sector, where they are, and what their aggregate turnover is, and also what the aggregate of full-time equivalent employees is in the independent sector, and including the BBC Studios, obviously now as part of the independent sector. We've also done about 24 interviews, I think, with a whole range of different stakeholders in the sector, again, including the Bottle Yard, BBC, Channel 4, lots of people that are in the audience as well, so thank you very much if we've spoken to you. And I suppose like the focus really for this edition is to build on the benchmark that the 2017 report gave us and to look at the challenges and the changes that have taken place since then, which has been really fascinating. Obviously, just there's been a lot of major ones, obviously. So that's, I suppose that's the core of what we're working on. It will be published in January, and we're hoping to do a launch at Channel 4 later that month. But one of the things we're not doing is talking about the freelancers in the sector, which we did do in the first report, partly because we haven't had the resources to do a survey of the freelance sector. It's quite tricky to capture freelancers in the sector. But what we have done since 2017, myself and colleagues, Andrew and other colleagues, is do sort of further work on that sector, including this major report here by our colleague Amy Genders called The Invisible Army. And I've brought some copies of these. You can take them if you want, if you're interested. Some research on Watershed cinema there, so Mark doesn't feel left out. Also, we're not looking at the exhibition sector in this. We're focusing just on the production sector, and a PhD also on independent cinema in the age of video on demand. Our colleague Megan Mitchell is the student carrying that PhD out. Watershed is the focus, but obviously it applies to kind of the national, international picture. So just to give you a bit of a taste of some of the things that we're working on in terms of the quants, the quantitative data. So there's 180, it's actually 188. Because this doesn't include BBC Studios. I'll talk about that in a bit. But so there's 188 companies in the independent sector at the moment. That's up from 131 in 2017. So it's a big increase. And so across these 6 different subsectors here, so facilities and post-production, and then the 4 major genres that are in the city, so branded content, animation, natural history, and factual. That's the kind of, it gives you a rough idea of what proportions the different subsectors exist in the city. So branded content is massive, but tends to be quite small in terms of its turnover and so on. There's also 7 companies in an emerging drama subcluster, which one of the things we were saying in 2017 is that one of the big limitations of Bristol's screen sector was the lack of indigenous drama production companies, and we were saying that needs to change, and it's really exciting to see that emerging now. Okay, and then in terms of the full-time equivalent employees, there's about 2,000. There's actually probably more like 3,000 if you include the BBC, but again, haven't had any luck getting data from them just yet. Don't know if I've said that already. Might say it again. So that in terms of the turnover, that's really interesting. How like the numbers of companies, how the kind of pie chart that reflects the numbers of companies changes when you break it down by turnover. So the aggregate of all these different firms is about 192 million. There, 193 million. And so you can see, for example, the natural history sector is only 16 natural history firms. That doesn't include the NHU, part of BBC Studios. But those 16 firms are responsible for 32% of the aggregate. So really interesting to look at this. And then we can also, thanks to the Bristol Film Office, Natalie, nice one. Thank you very much for giving us these figures. These aren't from us. The inward investment that's kind of supported and attracted to the city by the Film Office and by the Bottle Yard Studios amounts to 12.6 million this last year. You can see a dip there for obvious reasons, the pandemic and so on. So combined, then we might say that there's the economic value of the sector is approximately 205.5 million. You might add another up to another 100 million there. Were we to have BBC Studios data, which so far we've been unable to get hold of, but we are estimating it. So that will, once we can include BBC Studios in that figure, that will, it will increase significantly, I think, and it will make a big difference to the proportions of how much natural history is, what proportion of natural history is responsible for the total. Okay, I was just going to run through some of the brief changes that we mentioned, but I'll go through quite quickly there because we're probably going to be pushing our 15 minutes if I talk about this in detail. But obviously, there's a lot to say about all this, so just going to talk about BBC Studios very briefly and Channel 4. Obviously, major change that was happening as the last report went to press. The BBC outsourced all of its, what was in-house production, to a wholly owned commercial subsidiary called the BBC Studios, which pitches for commissions from all over the world, broadcasters and SVODs, as well as the BBC. So a major shift in the kind of infrastructure of how television is produced. But then all of the profits from that go back into the BBC's public service mission. So kind of interesting and significant change. One of the major things, obviously, is how that kind of the changes that made in terms of Bristol's production sector. So BBC Studios in Bristol consists of the NHU and one of 3 factory units in Belfast, Bristol, and Cardiff. So one of those 3 factory units is based here. And then at the end of this year, maybe early next year, people will know BBC Studios is separating from the public service side at White Ladies Road and moving to Finzel's Reach, near where the new Channel 4 base. So a real major historic shift in terms of the sort of centre of television production in the city is taking place. So Channel 4, obviously, another major change. I'll zip through this very quickly. I guess the main thing to say is that we haven't been able, because of the pandemic, I think Channel 4 has been constrained, and the impact of Channel 4 in the city has been kind of delayed somewhat. But it's been really interesting to kind of talk to them, talk to Sasha, and see how the ways in which Channel 4 is trying to integrate itself into the city and trying to use its clout to do certain things, including develop the emergent drama subcluster. So that's been really interesting. But obviously there's loads more to say about all this, but I'll just pass over to Andrew for next little bit.
Okay, what we did with Go West 1, and we're kind of updating for Go West 2, is the recommendations. And in a way, this sort of picks up what Lynn was talking about, I think, as well. So what can we kind of extrapolate from those quantification things that we've done and the cultural history? What would really help Bristol screen sector to move forward? Well, we think there should be an annual Bristol Screen Sector Summit. I don't know whether Andrew wants to run that, but certainly some organisation should take up that baton, I think. I think Steve's kind of made the point in a very subtle way about the BBC, and I think we need a need for regular data on production spend and employment figures in the nations and regions. I don't see why the BBC can't do that without compromising anything, but I may be wrong about that. As we said last time, I know this is very difficult at the present time with all the constraints on local authority spending, but if Bristol could, as well known, is becoming an increasingly expensive place to work and to live, if affordable city centre office space could be made available, that would help, I think. Certainly emergent indies to start up and not relocate. Steve's touched on and will elaborate the emergent drama cluster, which has always been a kind of weakness, if you can call it that, of Bristol's setup. Thinking back to Lynn, we think there should be greater coordination and collaboration regarding diversity in the workforce and talent development and support, but I think Natalie and other people are going to talk about that. And this is quite utopian maybe, but the tolls coming down on Severn Bridge was supposed to be the trigger for the Western Powerhouse. There should be greater cooperation between Bristol and Cardiff to produce a kind of power base between those two cities. There is a lot going on between them, kind of under the radar, but it would be great if that kind of those kind of initiatives were taken at a larger level. So, what would that annual Bristol Screen Sector Summit consist of? Well, we think it should be convened by Bristol City of Film as designated sector support body with UNESCO status. Sorry, Natalie, but we do think you are the obvious person to kind of coordinate that, and that should be coming from there. Well, all right, we'll talk to me later. The sector is clearly of size large enough to warrant such a summit. I think that's what we're arguing for, especially if the games cluster was included, which we haven't yet. And that summit would be a key means of addressing key issues and challenges in the sector. And the ones that we've highlighted at the moment, I suppose, are quite the obvious ones: diversity across class, disability, ethnicity, gender and race, networking and collaboration across production, distribution and exhibition, dialogue between freelancers, production companies and production sector support bodies, exposure or access to the sector for new talent, and collaboration between and among the region's educational institutions. So all those things are going on in various ways. So what we would like the summit to do is to bring those together for one event, and then that could set up a kind of agenda for the forthcoming year. Steve.
Yeah, so just finally then, so just to pick up on this, the support for Bristol's emerging drama cluster, which I really think should be a priority, and obviously it is a priority for stakeholders that we've been talking to. So it's an obvious growth area for the sector, and it does have a kind of emergent network. So Bristol Screen Producers Alliance is a network that was set up by someone called Kate Cook, who is one half of Indefinite Films, one of the fiction production companies in the city, and is sort of trying to do this work. So that but I think that's kind of an obvious target for support, and also a production fund. So Bristol is some way behind the curve on this, in that Liverpool, there's a fund called the Liverpool City Region Production Fund, I think it's called, and also the Yorkshire Screen Production Fund, both of which provide projects with awards of up to 500 grand, I believe. And we don't have anything like that in the city, and so I think that's a kind of key way in which we could start to support some of this, the emergent drama in the city. And and again, just to emphasise that there's been, the Bottle Yard Studios, I think Bristol owes a big debt to Fiona Frankham for setting that up and getting behind that, and continuing to attract a lot of the drama productions that have been supported by the Bottle Yard. But crucially, that's inward investment that's coming from production companies that are outside the city. It's not Indigenous drama support. It's not Indigenous drama production. So I think, that's a really exciting one. So when hopefully we'll be able to do this work in another 5 years' time, we'll be able to talk in a bit more detail about Bristol's flourishing drama subcluster. But that remains to be seen. All right, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Steve. Well, clearly a lot happening, but a lot of potential for growth as well. And we've talked there about production, and now we're going to talk a little bit about exhibition. One of the, I've worked very closely with our next speaker, Mark Cosgrove, for many years, I think almost 2 decades. And we worked together first of all, on the Encounters Festival, which Rich now is the director of. Mark is the director of cinema here, and he's going to be talking about cinema exhibition. Mark Cosgrove, thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I know a venue that might want to host such a conference, by the way. Now I've got to get out of everybody's presentations onto mine. Okay. Yeah. So, talking about cinema, there's definitely things that obviously connections across everything that the speakers have said there just now that I'm sure we'll pick up in conversation. But just to say that, so this is the title of my talk, and I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning and thought it's simpler than that. It's not all the C's, it's actually all the P's. It's place, it's people, and it's partnerships. So forget that. We'll talk about those 3 things, but no, we'll come on to it. And so what I realised yesterday, as Andrew said, with getting the conference underway, I realised yet again, if I needed to, the importance of place. And whilst I'm here to talk about cinema, it's actually the space next door, the cafe bar, that is actually central to the impact of cinema and the importance of place. I've had a lot of time to think about cinema, too much time actually, because whilst everybody was watching films during on the telly or on the computer or on, as I now have, a cheap digital projector on the wall, everybody's watching films, but cinema didn't exist. And so it made me think about, do we need cinema? And of course, my argument is that it's central, and it's actually central to us, to creativity, to place, to people. and key, again, is partnerships. And so what I'm going to do is sort of illustrate that. And I think what's happened as we've reopened is that for me, there's a clearer distinction that's come between cinema as a means of commercial exploitation of content, which we see with Bond, and we see with what we understand by the commercial mainstream, and cinema as a cultural connector of people, and those partnerships. And for me, it's really clarified the role that a cinema can play, a cinema like Watershed, and independent cinema in general. And the independent word is really important, and how it's constructed, etc. But what I want to do is just kind of illustrate some of that through some examples. And I used these pictures. Everything's intentional, of course. So I used these pictures, and the middle one was we obviously did a lot of stuff online, and this was during Cinema Rediscovered, and I was sat at the back of this auditorium with that computer with lots of people from the archive for a talk that was happening online, whilst I was lining up the interview that I had done with Agnès Godard, the great French cinematographer who works with Claire Denis. So this was me lining it up in the cinema. But what you see is screens in a darkened room, whereas what you see left and right of it is people together. After a screening, the screening is the sort of driver of people coming together to engage, but it's actually the things that happen around it. So what you see on the one on the far left, if you can see the cursor, I'll just walk. No point. Break the fourth wall. So what you have in this is after cinema Rediscovered screening is Lorena, who's from Trowbridge. She runs an independent cinema in Trowbridge. You've got a professor of film from Salford University. You've got Jonathan, who runs 1230 Collective, which is about promoting Caribbean cinema, and we just screened his film. You've got somebody who runs the Bad Film Club. You have the derriere of a projectionist. And then in the other one, you have the lovely face of the projectionist. And you have Michael Jenkins. This was inspired at Cables and Cameras takeover of Watershed, which is about local, but broader than that, but initiative is local black and people of colour filmmakers. Gary Thompson that runs it, and that's Michael Jenkins, who is a young filmmaker who I interviewed recently, and seeing Watershed through his eyes was a real experience for me, because his journey was through sort of engagement, through our engagement department, through RIFE, through BFI Film Academy. He's now making his own short films. He set up 2 companies, 8th Sense Media and Black Wave. But you can see the dynamics of the conversation, which is not happening in that bit in the middle. And then those kinds of relationships, which I think is one of the kind of key strengths of Bristol, and I have been here for 20 odd years, and increasingly it's those connections and those relationships that build up, that begin to, it is the basis of everything that I think that Lynn's talked about and that Andrew and Steve have talked about. So I had this initial image with other text on it, and I changed it. So the one at the top is Mark Jenkins talking to Tara Judah. Tara Judah is a film critic, one of the most important, I would say, film critics working, who's kind of recognised nationally and internationally. And she was working with me for a time at Watershed, and she's interviewing Mark Jenkins, the director of Bait, which was made in the southwest in Cornwall, but produced by these 2 people here, Early Days Film. And this was in Berlin, at the Berlin Film Festival, when Bait was first shown at the festival. And then the reviews started coming out, which began to make a huge noise about Bait, which then ended up being screened on this screen in this auditorium and being one of our most financially successful films pre-COVID, and just below Parasite in terms of income. And this in Berlin, I work in partnership a lot with UE and with Bristol University, but particularly with UE, on MAs, and this was MA in Contemporary Film Culture students who we'd taken together to Berlin Film Festival to get experience of working, of how a festival works, how a market works, because it's not just about the showing of films, it's about the buying, the selling, the development of feature films. And so we took them along and then could get them together with Kate and Lynn from Early Day Films. That's Mark Jenkins taking a photograph of his own film on screen. And then over here are people in Bristol who were representing Bristol and the creative industries at the Berlin Film Festival. There's UNESCO City of Film, BFI Network, Encounters Festival, and some guy making a strange face. So the going back to my original title, it is that cinema, the screening of a film, for me, is the start of a conversation with the audience. The screening of the film is absolutely central to that. But when you're watching the film, you are engaged with the film. It's what happens afterwards that, for me, is absolutely key. And this was illustrated really quite profoundly for me when we screened 12 Years a Slave, Steve McQueen's film in Bristol. So it was shown, because Steve McQueen's obviously Oscar, well, I don't think he was an Oscar winner then, but he developed a career as a feature film maker of great significance. He was a Turner-winning artist, etc. He'd made 12 Years a Slave, and when that film was released, it was shown in the multiplex, it was shown here at Watershed. And there's kind of real difference going back to the point I said about cinema as commercial exploitation or cinema as a kind of cultural connector. And when we screened it, I thought, well, you know, working with partners in Come the Revolution, and that's Roger Griffith from when he was working at head of Ujima Radio. I don't think you can show a film like 12 Years a Slave in a city like Bristol without acknowledging the kind of fraught relationship that Bristol has to slavery and the unresolved nature of it. So we set up a series of formal and informal events around the film. We were having talks, but there was also opportunities for people who had seen the film just simply to go into the cafe bar. And there would be people from Come the Revolution around, like Roger, like Edson, like Liz Cheggy. They'd be around if you just wanted to talk about it. And the image of Roger there sat there was one of the kind of most quite extraordinary events for me in the cinema. We screened the film, it was a packed auditorium. Roger introduced the screening and he said to the audience, I haven't seen this film yet. I know about it, obviously, because there's been a lot written about it, but I am watching it with you. So I'm a black man watching this film with you. There was a largely white audience. A film about slavery, and a very powerful film because Steve McQueen's a very powerful filmmaker. After the screening, everybody stayed. Roger went up on the stage and had that immediate response. The charge in the room was phenomenal. And actually there was two elderly white women and got into an incredible conversation about bullying. And because it took two elderly women, took them back to their experience at boarding school. I mean, they obviously didn't have experience of racism, but they had experience of bullying, which Roger brilliantly facilitated a conversation where those connections absolutely became profound and meaningful. And then, as part of that experience, we screened, a young black woman came along to one of the events, and she said that she had been to see 12 Years a Slave at the multiplex. And you imagine that experience. I mean, when I say this, I'm not knocking the multiplex. The commercial model does what the commercial model does brilliantly. It's just made 50 million for James Bond. It's kick-started the cinema economy again. But this young black woman went to see 12 Years a Slave at the multiplex, went in through that experience that we all know, was transported to the plantations of the Deep South, and the experience of Northup. I've just forgotten his name, Solomon Northup, as envisaged by Steve McQueen. And she came out of that screening. Now imagine that young black woman coming out of that screening in that, space. I mean, the space is what the space is. But she just wanted to talk to somebody about it. That model is not geared up for that conversation. And so when she came here, she had that conversation with people that could connect with the sentiments and the feelings. And for me, those conversations are what is key, and the cinema is a driver of those. These are just some examples of how under lockdown we tried to sort of keep those conversations going, whether it was through making work, through Short It Out, or doing online stuff. That's Edson, also from Come the Revolution, talking to the filmmaker of Real, Oki Omashabi. This is a partnership with UE Philosophy. We're getting it back in the venue, which again is about opening up those kinds of conversations about philosophy, about politics, about the world we live in, using film as the springboard for that. The curation side of it, these are, I think Dave Taylor Matthews is in the audience. We partner on MA curation, and these are, what I'm really keen on is getting voices, new voices coming through, using the cinema as a way of kind of getting those critical and cultural voices coming through. These are some examples of the people that have done the MA. Lola Young is currently doing it. I was really keen to get the history of cinema and the history of cinema and film in Bristol going, which is why I set up Cinema Rediscovered Festival, which is about partly uncovering and revealing Bristol's connection, which has been picked up with Bristol Ideas in the book, and you'll hear later about William Friese-Greene. I'm galloping because I'm aware that I've only got a few minutes left. So cinema's a talent development hub. We are home to the British Film Institute Film Hub Southwest, which has the BFI talent exec attached, Alice Cabanis and Alex Taylor. And these are some young filmmakers that we have been involved in through that. People like Paul Holbrook. My brain's just gone, sorry, with other names. Leading to going back to the earlier photograph, this was Cables and Cameras' takeover of Watershed. These are the Elias brothers there, Michael Jenkins being interviewed, young actor in Michael's film. These are the new emerging talent, and what I would want to say is that they have come up through wanting to make, wanting to watch, through, I've come across them through the cinema, through their love of watching film. Michael Jenkins up there came to see the restoration of Melvin Van Peebles' story, The 3-Day Pass, and was completely blown away, not just by the film, this film from the 1960s, but also by the fact that Melvin Van Peebles, a young black man who at that time directed, edited, produced, wrote the script, did the music, everything to do with that film. But seeing it on the big screen was a complete inspiration. So, bringing us up to date, there's a cinema in Redfield, which I went along to this meeting, Save Redfield Cinema meeting, and what's fantastic about that is a community that has come together around cinema. They've come together to, great if they can save the cinema itself, a Hamey Doots, as they say in Scotland, just because the capital that would be needed. But what I said to the group is that screen films anywhere, because you've got the community together, you've got the creative people that are involved already, so get that moving. Don't hang it all on the building. And if you are going to get that building, make sure you have a great social space and you have a great bar, because that's where all the connections and the networks will happen. So if I was to say what do we want in 10 years' time in Bristol, I'd actually kind of make it wider in a way. Well, first of all, in Bristol, I would want to have those people that I've mentioned making their feature films. I want to see Michael Jenkins' feature film. I want to see, as Edinburgh, and it was Chris Moll that said this when he was doing iFeatures, and I sort of really believe it, is Edinburgh had Trainspotting. Trainspotting completely changed the relationship with Edinburgh and film. I think I know of at least five people, Paul Holbrook being one of them, based in Hartcliffe, who has a feature film in him. He's got more than one feature film. I want to see those feature films coming out of Bristol that are set in Bristol, that are about Bristol, but that can travel internationally. In terms of cinema, the BFI are doing a 10-year strategy at the moment, and what I'm saying to the BFI is that what we need My headline is, each city should have 5 independent cinemas, each town should have 3 independent cinemas, and each village should have 1 independent cinema. Now, the villages can argue for more. I'm quite happy for that. Cities can argue for less or whatever, but that principle of independent cinemas being key talent drivers, cultural regeneration, social spaces, creative spaces, not just the commercial exploitation of content, and perhaps actually one of the streamers could fund those feature films. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Oh. Thank you very much, Mark. I mean, when I first started with Mark over 2 decades ago, it was fair to say that Watershed was facing significant problems. And I think the way that this organisation has evolved and changed and revolutionised itself has been one of the great success stories in Bristol. Mark is one of the authors in our collection of essays, which I mentioned earlier on, and if you haven't got a copy of that, you'll be able to get them from outside after this session and in the break. But we are going to have some readings from the book in a moment, and we've chosen 5 of the 42 that are in the book, and the first 2 readings are going to be from Sian Norris and Marnie Kidston. So I'm going to start with Sian. Is that okay? Would you like to come onto the platform? Sorry, can I just say, Sian is a writer, journalist and director of the Bristol Women's Literature Festival, and we've worked together for quite a number of years. So thank you, Sian.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's really great to be here celebrating cinema. So my essay is called Women on the Silver Screen. I'm just going to read a section of it. When I was 12 years old, I fell in love with a woman wearing a white blouse arriving at a bar with a man to whom she was secretly married. I watched as she was forced to choose between her husband and the man she loved, who in turn was forced to choose between his own self-interest and fighting for the anti-fascist cause. The woman was Ingrid Bergman, and the film was Casablanca. I must have watched it dozens of times since then, including on the big screen. And from that first discovery, I devoured as much as I could about Bergman and the films of her era, watching scratchy recordings of Spellbound and Notorious on VHS video, staying in to watch For Whom the Bell Tolls on a Saturday afternoon on BBC Two, and cutting out pictures from magazines of Hollywood's golden era stars and keeping them in a scrapbook. I may have been growing up in the 1990s, but my heart was in a 1930s picture house watching the talkies. To me, those movies were populated by a world of women. It was women who were the stars, not the men who played beside them. Who remembers Glenn Ford when next to Rita Hayworth, or Fred McMurray compared to Barbara Stanwyck and her ankle bracelet? The women were spotlit, front and centre, and it was their names in lights. This was the early noughties, a period whose treatment of women has been undergoing some re-evaluation. And when I look back at that cultural moment, it can be summed up with the phrase, women were seen and not heard. Everywhere you looked in the early noughties, women's bodies were on display. They were on the covers of lads' mags, in women's magazines, slices of naked flesh served up with cellulite magnified. We were surrounded by female flesh, but we hardly ever got to hear women's stories. Then I'd walk into the cinema and everything would change. At the cinema, watching the black and white films from the golden era, women got to speak. We got to be brave, and we got to crack jokes, and we got to cause havoc, and we got to wreak hell. Some of us met bad ends, but it was even better when we got away with it. And the women in those movies never stopped talking. Katharine Hepburn wisecracked her way through Bringing Up Baby, just as she did in Adam's Rib. They were successful at their careers. I wanted to be a journalist after watching Rosalind Russell in His Girl Friday. Women were funny, Jean Harlow in Bombshell and Clara Bow in It. They were sexy and in control, and no wonder you can't tear your gaze away from Mae West when you think about how she wrote, directed and starred in all the movies. It didn't always end well for these women, but some of them had a happy ending, and at least most of them got to do. Of course, most of those bad endings were a result of women characters stepping outside the strict gender roles imposed upon them during the Golden Age. And I don't want to pretend that this was some kind of wonderful time for women. There were some terrible things happening in the patriarchal studio system, from sexual abuse to enforced drug culture. But when the mainstream cinema I grew up with in the noughties and 90s was packed with teen gross-out films and superhero epics, films where women's bodies existed as objects for men to use and abuse, or where they were hooker, daughter, or wife, hearing women speak the funny lines and getting to express a full range of human emotion felt pretty damn liberating. So one of my favourite films from that era is called Stage Door. And Ginger Rogers may have done everything backwards and in high heels when she was with Fred, but in Stage Door she is determinedly moving forward with life on her own terms, wearing sensible shoes. The film celebrates female friendship in all its complex loves and rivalries. It's about poverty and work. It's about empathy with vulnerability, and about women who don't have wealth or family connections and how they survive. It tackles issues of male exploitation and entitlement in a way that is strikingly modern, and it does it all with Rogers, Katharine Hepburn, Lucille Ball, and Eve Arden, who strides around the rickety set in enviably well-cut trousers. This essay isn't intended as a nostalgia fest, a sigh and a shrug that they just don't make them like they used to. There were terrible films made then, and you can find a lot of them on YouTube. It's simply that at an age when I was being told women could only be one thing, watching the Golden Era films taught me that women could be something else. We didn't have to be naked and silent, and we didn't have to exist in the male gaze. We could have the best lines while wearing the best hats. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sian. Our next extract is going to be read by Marnie Kidston. We put out a call via our partners in the University of the West of England Creative Writing course, who we work with on a number of projects, for contributions of essays, and Marnie's was submitted and we were delighted to publish it. So Marnie, could you come and read your extract?
Hi, thanks for having me. So yeah, this is an abridged version of my essay, and I'm going to start from the beginning and then cut a chunk out and head to my conclusion. As Danny and Sandy flew away in the grease lightning car, I sank back into a soft mix of teddies and pillows with a grin on my face. You liked it then, my friend Jess stated smugly, reciprocating my smile. I can't believe you hadn't seen it before. I know. As it fell quiet and the credits rolled, my grin faded. Bit weird how it ends though, isn't it? Like, after all that, Sandy's just completely someone else now. Yeah, I always think that. Bit of a stupid ending, really, isn't it? At 13, that was my first experience of noticing a film where a woman had to change who she was for a man. Thinking back now, the boys looking up the girls' skirts on the bleachers and tell me more, did she put up a fight was pretty messed up too. Don't get me wrong, we've come a long way since 1978, but harmful stereotypes of women still saturate modern film and TV. These negative gender stereotypes have serious impact on the lives of real women. Their perception of self, their place in society, and their goals and aspirations are all influenced by what they see on screen. As Douglas Kellner put it, radio, television, film, and the other products of media culture provide material out of which we forge our very identities, our sense of selfhood, our notion of what it means to be male or female. In the first few years of secondary school, I worried intensely that I wouldn't grow a pair of boobs. My mum didn't have the genetics for them, and I assumed I was destined for the same fate. Although Mum didn't seem to care, TV and film said otherwise. They seemed incessantly focused on these unattainable symbols of femininity. So one day, as I was getting ready for school, putting on the pink star pattern padded bra I just bought, a great idea hit me. I'd stuff it. How had I not thought of it before? It was at my first festival that it all came crumbling down. We were dancing to Newton Faulkner at the front of the crowd, breathless, high on the atmosphere. My cheeks ached from smiling. Little did I know, with each rhythmic jump my body made, the tissue inched its way further out of my bra. I was entirely oblivious until my friend Lauren looked at me with a horrified grimace on her face. "What's that?" she mouthed over the music, pointing at my chest. My throat dried up. I looked down, terrified at what I might find. There it was, sticking out, a wad of tissue that scarred me for life. Okay, maybe a bit dramatic, but I was mortified. My face burned as I shoved it back where it came from at lightning speed. I looked at my friend, shook my head, speechless, and acted as if it didn't happen. The remainder of that night and my memory of the festival was tainted with shame from that moment on. It's no surprise the lengths I went to in pretending I had a pair of boobs before my body was ready. Many damaging socially accepted ideas regarding gender began in and are perpetuated by the dominant narratives of pop culture. From a young age, the idea that women need to be sexy is shoved down our throats. Women exist as objects of male desire throughout film, including those aimed at children. Even animated females are hypersexualized. From Jessica Rabbit through to Lola from Shark Tale, we see exaggerated eyelashes, breasts, curves, and we see the male reaction to them. We need more females behind the scenes. Real women's stories don't get told because such a small proportion of writers, producers, and directors are women. Studies have shown time and again that gender representation behind the scenes directly affects what comes out on screen. Films that have higher proportions of women working on them tend to hire more women in key roles and represent them with more authenticity and positivity. We need to create more of these role models on screen so that life can start to mirror art and our women and girls can aspire without restraint. We need to show them that not only they can be who they want to be and do what they want to do, but that that is preferable and the world will be a better place for it.
Thank you very much, Marnie, and we look forward to hearing more about your career in writing. Thank you very much for that. It was a delight to publish you. We've talked a little bit today about William Friese-Greene and Bristol, and one of the reasons we're running the Bristol Film 2021 project this year is because it's the centenary of his death, and we're now going live to London, I understand, to hear Peter de Mankiewicz, who I met in 1995, and he came to me and said he was interested in working on William Friese-Greene, but no one had heard of him. The few who did didn't care about him. And since then, Peter, I think, those who know him, has really pursued this doggedly and has found new research. He's exhausted us sometimes, I think, in terms of the work he's done, but we've been delighted to support him. One of the great pleasures of this year has being able to support Peter, who's now embarking on a PhD on Friese-Greene. But Peter's going to talk about Friese-Greene in Bristol and his importance today. Thank you very much, Peter. Remember, Friese-Greene wrote in the silent period, so we're replicating the experience now. Tested earlier. Yeah. Perhaps we should go to the next readings and then. Ewan, is it better we go to the next readings and you sort it out in the next few minutes? Sorry?
It was working earlier.
I know, yeah. Should we just do the next two readings, because then we have got a break after that, but we can then see if we can get Peter back. Yeah, we'll come back in again. So so we'll come back to Peter. What I'm going to ask is, we've got two more readings before we have the break, and hopefully we'll get back to Peter then. Malaika Kagodi will do the next reading for us. Poet Malaika Kagodi, thank you. And drama writer.
Oh no, oh Peter. You can hear me at least. Yeah. Hello. I was just like sitting back to watch Peter. I'm like, oh God, that's showbiz, I guess. Hi, I'm Malaika. My essay begins with me telling off a drug dealer in Showcase Cinema Deluxe, and it also has a bit of like saucy language. So I'm going to skip past that bit because it feels a bit early in the day, and get to the meat in the middle of my essay. For me, An empty screen is usually a happy screen, but I don't want to fall into the tempting trap of lamenting bad cinema etiquette. Too quickly, that discussion can turn to a kind of misanthropy that I'm not interested in indulging. In truth, the annoyance we experience during these interactions stems from a disconnect. Cinema should feel like a universal connection. All bodies engaged in feeling something together. There's something incredibly intoxicating about being part of a group, your reaction being strengthened by those around you, your emotions validated by a shared engagement. When someone is talking at full volume to their friend about their evening plans, that spell is broken. When we go to the cinema, life outside those walls should be suspended for a couple of hours as we fall into the worlds presented to us on screen. My favourite cinema experience, where I felt that headiness of communal connection most intensely, took place on the 9th of June, 2017. A few weeks previously, my partner had booked us tickets to see Stop Making Sense, Jonathan Demme's electrifying 1984 concert film that captures talking heads in their prime. It had been one of those pale, transitionary spring days, with yellow skies and an undercurrent of that sweaty heat that makes you all floppy and inert. We almost didn't go, almost gave in to the dehydration and laziness, but we pulled ourselves together and sauntered down to the Cube, Bristol's bijou volunteer-run microplex, nestled in its neon glory just off Dove Street. The Cube is a beautiful cinema. That was nice. The Cube is a beautiful cinema. The minute you step through the leafy smoking, the minute you step through the gates, you automatically feel about 40% cooler. From the tiny leafy smoking area to the endearingly shabby bar and nostalgia-tinned cinema with its red velvet seats. The Cube makes you feel as though you're living in your very own indie movie fantasy. The screening was sold out, and the Cube at full capacity has something of a house party vibe. The place smelled of IPA and bodies that had been in the sun all day, fresh sweat and ozone. It's like I've got a theme tune. We bought our ales and settled into our seats, feeling very Bristol. Stop Making Sense opens with the growing sound of an audience filling up Hollywood's Pantages Theatre. Disembodied voices chattering and whistling, their excitement is palpable as the volume grows. The sudden buoyant whoops as David Byrne takes the stage, we see only his legs at first in baggy grey trousers, had a quietening effect at our audience in the Cube. The film was about to begin, so we assumed the cinema etiquette we were used to, as Byrne's distinctive tenor opened the show. Hi, I got a tape I want to play. David Byrne is absolutely captivating in Stop Making Sense. His wide eyes rove across the audience as though he has never seen human beings before. His cheekbones are razors, and his long, thin body draped in a loose-fitted grey suit is a striking presence on a wide, empty stage. Accompanied only by a guitar and a boombox, he breaks into a bold rendition of Psycho Killer. When the drum machine that supports the song begins glitching, the rattle resembles the sounds of gunfire. Byrne stumbles about the stage. Journalist Stephanie Zacharek likens his movements to those of Jean-Paul Belmondo's final moments in Breathless, a hero succumbing surprise to violence that he thought he was prepared for. With each glitch, Byrne shifts his focus from audience to camera and back again, while behind him, stagehands begin assembling the set. If you were in any doubt that this film would be cinematic, this is the moment we realize that this is much more than just a recorded gig. As the stage is built, the rest of the band trickle in, song by song. Tina Weymouth providing steady, searing bass lines, the eternally smiling Chris Frantz on drums, and slinky Jerry Harrison on guitar. Finally, the exuberant presence of Lynn Marby and Edna Holt, Bernie Worrell, Steve Scales, and Alex Weir complete the lineup. Each person brings on stage a story, a character, and Demi frames them as a ragtag band of misfits, welcoming us to join them. And who wouldn't want to?
Thank you very much. let me just check, Stephen. Stephen is our next reader, but I just want to check if we've actually got the sound. We have. So I think if we excuse us, Stephen, if we go to this first while we've got it working, I think. So then I'll come to you. Peter.
Oh, can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Hooray, hooray. Hello. We've got to imagine that I'm just kind of sitting up the back somewhere, because effectively that is the view that I have, and it's a view I'm extremely familiar with in the Watershed. Well, it's been an extraordinary 6 months. A few years ago, I had this crazy idea that just as William Friese-Greene had his reputation trashed on the centenary of his birth, that now the entire course of his life had effectively passed again, we could reassess him on the centenary of his death. And in 2019, I talked this over with Andrew Kelly and Mark Cosgrove and various other folk in Bristol. And whilst it was exciting, it seemed to me just unreachable. There was no way that I could handle something like that. And I was quite correct. I couldn't handle something like that. What I needed was all these other people to handle it. People like Bristol Ideas and Cinema Rediscovered and Southwest Silence and the UNESCO City of Film office and others. And it really astonished me that they did, that they planned and fundraised and organized events, and even all the chaos of COVID didn't kill off the idea. And it became something bigger to celebrate Bristol and film-going, filmmaking in a much wider sense, which is what we're doing today, including with this fantastic book, which I recommend to you and all others. Very, very interesting and engaging essays. Perfect toilet reading, I'm just saying. And, just randomly picking one out, you get things like this if you want to understand why I'm so completely obsessed with William Friese-Greene, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about today. But I'm going to take a slight liberty and connect it to my experience with Bristol and film down the years and how it's all caught up in the Friese-Greene stuff. So first up, very, very briefly, let me just try and explain for the very few people who I've not bored into submission in the last 6 months, why I consider William Friese-Greene to be important. So, oops, hang on, let me just, okay, let's just get, yeah. There. So, William Friese-Greene was born in 1855, a working class kid, the youngest in a family of 7, and he was lucky enough to be a charity scholar at Queen Elizabeth Hospital School, where he was for a few years. And when he graduated, well, when he left the school, he then went on to be apprenticed to a photographer on 17 Royal Promenade, which is what you know as Queen's Road, right there. But really, no time at all. A few years later, he kicked in his apprenticeship. He married a German woman, Helena Friese, who was 5 years older than him. He joined her name to his, because he was just Willie Greene originally, and became William Friese-Greene with an extra E on the end. And having opened several studios in the West Country, he then took his brand up to London, where he was even more successful with many more studios and fancy clientele. And he did something extraordinary, which was basically to blow all the money on inventing, and specifically on inventing a moving picture camera in 1889, years before Edison or the Lumiere brothers did any such thing. And here you see a very happy little boy operating a replica of one of his first cameras, the one that he probably first actually showed to the world. So he went bankrupt, he got rich again, he went bankrupt again, he even went to jail. And he invented all sorts of other stuff, which is, worth quickly mentioning, including a lot of work on early color film systems, such as this. But actually, let's just forget about all of that and go back a moment. Now, to be a success, he had to go to London, right? Now, I recently found some paperwork from 1993 and 4 between Andrew Kelly and myself. There you go, with the Bristol Cultural Development Partnership, as was, where we were discussing all sorts of things like, how could we celebrate Friese-Greene, which all went into a whole plan for the cinema centenary. Unfortunately, as it turned out, we would have to wait an entire quarter of a century to realize quite a lot of those plans, but it's happened. But this was precisely the same moment that I was beginning to take myself more seriously as a filmmaker. I'd been making some money doing, commercial videos, branded content, as we now call it. But now I was working with artists. I was getting some funding to make films. I wanted to actually tell narrative stories. But all of that had developed whilst I'd been in Bristol in the last few years, from the late 80s onwards. And I can tell you where it all began. It all began climbing a staircase in a rather dilapidated and dingy building in Jamaica Street to knock on the door of the then Bristol Film Workshop. And that door was answered by Richard Kwiatniowski, who would go on to be a feature director, and also he's a teacher of film, which is kind of also what happened to me, in fact. And what he did was he rented me this. It was a really good quality Super 8 camera, and it cost £2 a day. And that was how I began to make films. So I took various short courses at the Watershed's film and video department, as then existed. And then this culminated, as I recall, in a week where we did a 1-week intensive summer school where I got my first taste of directing one afternoon and really got the bug. And that course was led by Richard and by Grace Kitto, who some of you might know, who's a producer in the Southwest. And at the end of the course, Richard took me aside and he said, you shouldn't be coming on these courses. And I went, why? He said, well, you should be teaching them. Now, I didn't quite believe him at the time, but actually it turned out he was right. And I did teach them. And when the decision was taken to close the Watershed's film and video department, Shafiq Belani, who was running it at that time, got together with Richard and various other people, including myself, to lobby for a new organization, which would take all of the equipment from the two organizations and new things to serve independent filmmaking in Bristol. And that organization was called Picture This, which a few of you may remember. So I became involved in the management committee there, was chairing that for a couple of years. Later, I worked there for a while. And the purpose of that organization was basically to provide training and facilities that would allow people who might otherwise, for whatever reason, not have the opportunity to make films to actually do so. And whether that was because they're from groups in society who are unlikely to be given those opportunities, they were independent filmmakers, they were artists working in the medium. And amongst the things we did, we set up one of the first courses, I think, in the country, and certainly the first in the city, for ethnic minority filmmakers. And in a way, to actually say that is slightly wrong, because the first thing we had to do was think of how to identify people who might go on to make films, as they had not yet had the opportunity to do it. Because at that point in time, the big obstacle was simply having access to affordable equipment and training. And the kind of equipment we could offer was really swanky, lightweight camera and porta-pack stuff like this. But this was the cutting edge for what was affordable for an organization like us at that time. And, I'm not kidding, quite literally, my mobile phone, is capable of taking far, far better quality images, far, far better quality sound. I could probably even do better editing on this than all of that equipment. That's how much things have changed. There were already some very talented people in Bristol. Obviously, the art and animations already existed. There was a natural history unit doing all its work, but this was not generally believed really outside of Bristol. The attitude was always that if you had talent, well, then you went to London. And the attitude in London was that, well, if you chose to remain in a place like Bristol, well, that clearly meant you lacked ambition at the very least, if not talent as well. And on one occasion, I was contacted by a panicked commercials producer in London who had a job to do for SWEB, the Southwest Electricity Board, and they had insisted that the commercial be shot in Bristol with local crew. And as far as he was concerned, that was impossible because there wasn't anybody talented there. So he rang me up and said, well, would I take on the producing of it and find these people, which I did. I mean, it had like just a week to pull all this together. And after a few days, I had a very satisfying phone call when I called him up and I said, well, I've only got 3 BAFTA winners on the crew. Do you think that's going to be enough? He later told me that it was the first project he'd worked on, which actually came in dead on time and under budget. Well, now I live in London, having lived in Madrid in between, and I'm able to look at it from the other side. And I can confirm that, yes, most media people in London are still arseholes who think that this is the only possible creative centre of the universe. But I'm very happy to say that thinking overall is shifting, has shifted, especially with decisions taken by the BBC and Channel 4, but also especially the growth of independent companies. Very satisfying to hear about just how many new independent companies have appeared in Bristol in recent years. That's quite heartwarming, because the change has been glacial, because here I'm talking about several decades of time going by. But kind of like a glacier, you know, when you look back over time, you've got to go, well, it's really quite a lot of big stuff that's moved. So, for instance, it is very encouraging that somebody like Mark Jenkin makes Bates, it's a big success, and then he remains in Cornwall making films. So things really have changed from when I first got into filmmaking in Bristol, and from William Friese-Greene realised that if he properly wanted to be a success, he had to go up to London if he really wanted to get noticed and establish himself. Now, the very first idea that William Friese-Greene had and patented with a guy called Mortimer Evans was this. It was an extraordinary, teensy little thing that you could just carry around in your hand like Kodak of its day, and you could just go anywhere and film things spontaneously. This is another replica. And that freedom has now got to a level that we can encapsulate it in something as small as a mobile phone, and, well, maybe, you know, things which are larger and more professional, but still far, far, far more easily usable. So it doesn't have to be a London. It doesn't have to be a Los Angeles to do something. And I like to think that it's something that William Friese-Greene saw right from the start, you know, that this could be something that could happen anywhere, and it could happen spontaneously. That you didn't have to be wedded to a large industrial process or indeed to a huge city. So I suppose one little message today is I just kind of want to encourage new filmmakers, or new wave of filmmakers, the ones who are growing up in this extraordinary time with this new technology represents this amazing democratization of filmmaking, where it's no longer a huge obstacle to have access to the means of production. I would exhort them to stay in the city of Bristol if that is what you want to do, and make the films that you want to make and tell the stories that you want to tell right where you are, because deep down, I'm absolutely sure it's what William Friese-Greene would have wanted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. Just before we have a break, we've got a final reading from this morning's session with Stephen Lightbound. Stephen, can I hold the mic for you? Yeah, you did that, yeah. I think that's working.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to read my essay, which is about disability in film. I start the essay by pointing out that James McAvoy has played someone with a disability at least 7 times, to my counting. But I'm going to read the extract about Avatar. I first watched Avatar when it was released and chose the IMAX at Waterloo in London, completely at capacity for the screening. It's a huge cinema based on a roundabout next to Waterloo Station. It's impossible to miss, and it fitted my desire to see this film on the biggest screen possible. Much was also made of the fact that many of the screenings would be in 3D to create an immersive viewing experience. Let's remember, this is a sci-fi film set on an alien moon. The spaceships, walking robots, incredible technology that allows you to transfer your consciousness into the body of a different species. And Jake, who pushes onto the screen for the first time in his wheelchair. One that looked more basic than the one I had arrived at the cinema in. As he pushes onto the base, he's met with the phrase, "Look, it's Meals on Wheels." This was when I started to become very aware of my presence. This whole setup is designed to make the audience start to feel sorry for Jake. The barbed comment, the wheelchair that looks prehistoric alongside the advanced technology, and the fact that he's only there because his able-bodied twin had died and they had no option but to turn to him. These are just the first few seconds of the film. Perhaps I'm overthinking it. Perhaps the rest of the cinema was not aware of this. Perhaps little thought was given to how the disabled community would feel upon seeing this film, as it was intended to break box office records, not change perceptions. Perhaps. But these things matter. They matter because, intended or not, they are the messages they give. As a paraplegic, it was the nuances and small details I saw. The way Sam Worthington's legs had been made to look atrophied through CGI. The way he's able to lift and wear a heavy backpack that should have knocked him off balance and pushed him forwards. The way he seems to labour when transferring out of his chair, or the fact he doesn't sit on a cushion. And that last point is probably the one that annoys me the most. I've lost count of the times I've watched a film seeing a wheelchair user and they're not just sat on a cushion. This is basic. Cushions are essential for pressure relief. Paying such little attention to these details shows quite clearly that portraying an accurate depiction of paralysis was not high up on the agenda. For those unfamiliar with Avatar, the year is 2154. Humans are mining Pandora, a habitable moon home to the Na'vi, to replace natural resources that have been depleted on Earth. To learn more about the moon, scientists placed the consciousness of genetically matched humans into Na'vi hybrid avatars. The head of the security force protecting scientists tells Jake that he can have his legs restored if he gathers intelligence. You with me? Let's unpick this some more. The year is 2154. Now let's look at Jake's wheelchair again. A wheelchair less developed than the one I sit in now. Do we really think if we can fly to a moon in another planetary system that wheelchairs will not have advanced? Or, by that point, a cure for paralysis will not have happened? Or is the only way to access the cure to be presented, to pretend to be an alien life form? What does that tell us about how society views disability? The film is about 4 days long, and the above is a lot to process. So I was totally unprepared for what comes next. The first time Jake's consciousness is placed into Na'vi hybrid and he begins to walk. In all my years of watching films in the cinema, I am yet to have a visceral experience like the one I felt when Jake, as the Avatar, first stretches his legs, stands, finds his balance, and then goes outside onto the basketball court, starts running and feels the sensation of the grass on his feet. With the 3D glasses viewed through the eyes of Jake, this felt incredibly real to me, and the nearest I have felt to walking since my accident. The result was profound, and I started to cry. At what I was experiencing, at what Jake must have felt, at being jealous of someone using an avatar to experience by what at that point should have been medically possible. This is one of the parts of the film and the treatment of disability that I think is actually handled well. However, I was angry at the implied reasoning that the carrot of walking again at whatever the cost was worth casting aside everything and everyone you know. This film is set almost 150 years in the future, and views of disability clearly haven't progressed in any of that time. The impact of what I felt was difficult to process, but I tried to articulate it in a poem, which I wrote on leaving the film and appeared in my first collection. It's called Walking Again Through Avatar, and I'll share it now. Act 1. In 3D glasses, I walk as Sully's blue-skinned Na'vi, mobile again. I've got this. Folded into my velvet cinema seat, somehow unbalanced, running on feet not owned for 15 years. I breathe, I believe. Act 2. Behind the glasses, tears escape the red-blue hue as I escape into celluloid. Trapped by my body, prisoner in the IMAX, grateful for the black box darkness. Credits. I'm not ready to wrench atrophied legs from seat to wheelchair. Groundbreaking. I ran. The names of those who helped me challenge surgeons' words roll before my eyes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Just one final thing before the break. We've got the second of our new films. Rich, would you like to introduce this one?
The second film is by another Bristol filmmaker called Lucy Burney. It's called We Are Bristol. Again, these films were commissioned with very little input from us, and just with one simple line of like, what does the Bristol City of Film mean to you? So yeah, second film.
Thank you, Lucy. I don't know, is Lucy in the audience? Yeah? Oh, here's Lucy. Congratulations, Lucy. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to have a break now. If people could come back at 11:30, just to let you know that some of the people that Mark mentioned in his talk, Michael Jenkins, Edson Burton, will be speaking later on in the final session. We'll come back after the break with sessions on UNESCO City of Film and the future, how we make film and film festivals sustainable, and then a general panel looking at the future of film and cinema and Bristol. You do now have the chance to go and take advantage of that communal space to network and to chat in the Watershed bar through there. So thank you very much. If you could come back 11:30, that would be great. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers so far. Thank you.